Thank you all for tuning in and everyone for joining us. It's so brilliant to see unmasked faces on the first actually unmasked day in San Francisco and I think in all of California. It's very, very wild to think that we had to cancel this project like 2 weeks before it was supposed to launch because of lockdown. And here we are in Zoom land when things are coming right back again. So very, very thrilled to welcome the Gawdafful National Theater and Asher Hartman. Thank you all for being here with us today. I just want to remind everyone that the lab sits on Ramaytush Ohlone land. This land was stolen from the Ramaytush Ohlone people, and we acknowledge that simply to acknowledge the wealth of knowledge lost in that colonialist capitalist expansion and the impoverishment that came with that loss of all of us. And we want to extend our gratitude to the many, many different Indigenous people who have stewarded this land for generations. I'd also like to mention that we do offer any kind of accessibility services, whether it be language accessibility, sign language accessibility, any kind of services. But we just ask that you request them in advance. We have a budget for it. We just want to make sure that any possible range of services are available. So hopefully someday we can offer those no matter what for every single program, but it is tricky right now. So the lab does a few of these commission projects every year. Hopefully someday we'll do tons and tons, but right now we offer 3 to 4 artists per year, $25,000 to $100,000 each. Through the pandemic, we've been able to do this somehow by miracle, I guess, and we're still going on, but we give the artists not only the financial resources, but we also ask them to kind of change and reconfigure the institution itself. We really want to know how far they can take that provocation and what happens when their work conflicts with the way we run the space itself. We really kind of want to make visible the limits of our freedom in that way. I think it's a generative space for everyone involved. So Asher, I think I reached out to you in January 2018. I was just looking at my email to try to find you.
Yeah. It's been a minute, but I first do have to piggyback on what you're saying to really thank you for what actually is kind of jaw-dropping support. It's rare to have this kind of support all the way through this extremely long and ongoing project. I've been super fortunate in my life to have a tremendous amount of support, but I just want to thank you, like, just emotional, financial, belief system, physical support, every step of the way. Thank you so much.
It's an honor watching this thing iterate and evolve and kind of become the organism itself. How lucky are we? It's been beautiful. Oh, and I also want to extend my gratitude to Hope Svensson and Aaron Flint Jameson and everyone out there at Yale Union who did the first iteration of the Dope Elf when it was live and in the gallery, and you all were living there for 2 months. That was October 2019. So we got to actually breathe on each other very literally for a long, long, long period of time. And that was just an absolute extraordinary thing. And we'll of course talk about the transition from doing the in-gallery theatrical presentation to this new film version of the project. So when I approached you, Asher, I was basically trying to figure out, I had seen a couple plays and I was like, this is channeling this kind of space. It's making me deeply uncomfortable. It's also extremely playful. There's a kind of fuckery in it that I was really intrigued by. And I was trying to figure out what the kind of the residue of how the plays worked on me, like 2-3 weeks later, like what was happening there. And I really just wanted to invite you to the lab to really, I just really like how you fuck with institutions specifically. And I mean, primarily like the art world spaces that I've become so familiar with. So I'm just deeply impressed and interested in how that happened. You've been making theater with Gawdafful National Theater for 6 years now, right?
More than that, I think 10 with this group. From not everybody, but generally speaking, 10 years. Yeah.
Amazing. Quite a relationship.
Yes, as you can see. Yeah.
We'll talk about the process of what it's like. And the type of viscerality of that experience. And you described Gawdafful Asher as a loose, highly trained, strongly gifted actor, artist, and my favorite description of anyone.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Oh yeah, I mean everybody here, and I'll obviously I don't want to speak for anyone here, but everyone here is, a kind of a compound person. Everyone here is an artist, a writer, a director, a composer, a musician, a thinker, a performance artist. Everyone has their own practice that really spans through, fiction and nonfiction writing, composing, everything that I just mentioned. And so when we're working together, hopefully, I think people are bringing their full artist selves to the work. So it is collaborative in the sense that I think, y'all can tell me if I'm right or wrong, that we're all kind of mixing it up, arguing, playing, sometimes working extremely hard. Everybody here works extremely hard. And I have to say that these pieces, especially this one, usually take about a year minimally to develop. From the writing to the staging to then performing will happen after that. But typically we work in a really concerted way, and we have for, since I met most of these people. I think I met Paul and Zoot and Jasmine in 2010, and then Joe pretty soon after, Philip soon after, and then Michael and Jacqueline, and many, many other people. Gawdafful National Theater is about 25 or so people who fit the same description.
Right on. Yeah, it's kind of it's an amazing group, and I love the website for Gawdafful too, because you can read like the entire cabal of people, a little bit about each of them. So I think we're going to try to chat for 45 minutes or 40 minutes, and then we can turn the audience loose on you and just let everyone use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen to ask questions of the actors or Asher or any of us about this whole weird process. But first, I want to ask you, Asher, kind of like if you can give a loose synopsis of how the dope elf materialized, what gave you the idea, how the process.
Yeah, well, the dope elf actually came out of jealousy. I was jealous of this other person who was a sort of so-called elf, and I was thinking, well, if this person's an elf, at the time I think I fancied myself a bit of an elf, so I was a little like, if this person can have a show, why can't I? So I thought, well, maybe I should have a YouTube channel, which is, of course, the natural progression from the hidden folk to YouTube. And I invited a lot of beautiful artists, queer people, queer folk, magicians, etc., to be part of this piece. And everybody came, and people are amazing, except it was very clear immediately that I had no charisma and I don't belong on stage. So it's like I was not holding the center of this idea. So I thought, well, why elf? What is elf? Why do I care about elf? So of course, like anybody, I went to the library and I tried to find a book on the hidden people. They frankly don't like being called elves. But so hidden people, hidden folk, are the good people, and I found one picture book for adults. At the time, there really wasn't a lot of information for whatever reason, and I opened the page, and right away it says on the page, well, let's be real, elf means, at least in this tradition, white, light, and frankly Caucasian. So it's like, thinking, well, elves are like, they should be like interesting then, this description really intersected with what I'm interested in, have been historically interested in as a maker of theater, which is American psychological violence. That is a through line through everything that I do. So I wanted to find more about elves, trying to be, wrap this up. But come to find the elves are not, cute tricksters necessarily. They do like blood and plenty of it. They play with blood very gleefully. And so I was really interested in like why I was attracted to this. So I started writing. As you mentioned earlier, like a lot of writers, a bit of a channeler. So I'm just writing, and it became evident to me that I was writing my autobiography, and not in a traditional sense, my mother did this, my father did this, but literally the way in which I saw myself as multiple and the people around me in my neighborhood as multiple, and attached to their querulous histories, their strange ancestral legacies, their oddness, their perniciousness, their violence, and the way that it welled up in me as an individual, and how it deformed me in essence. And going back to this idea of whiteness, or the construction of whiteness, for me a long-term project, and a lot of my work and a lot of work that we've all done together is around the way in which the construction of whiteness or white supremacy deforms or malforms the psyche, the mind, the body at a very granular, I should say like microbial even, level. And so I took the work to the actors, and we started working on it, as I typically do. And at that point, we were kind of thinking about, well, what do we want to work on? Because everybody here has their own practice. So what is it that people are after as an artist? And so people talked about that. We worked with, what I don't like to call the shadow side, but people know the term Jungian shadow. But let's call it the side of us that we disavow. And we were working with that. The only character that felt like not unalterable, but like pretty stiff in that realm was the dope elf, played by Jacqueline, because I don't know, Jacqueline, you can answer this, but we feel like we have very symbiotic connection, or there's something in our histories that really go kind of like directly to each other. But I know this isn't the short capsule version, but then we started working on the text together, and we have a process of working on the text over and over again. The actors will read and go, yeah, this works, this doesn't work. We'll start to march through it. We'll start to tear it up. More text comes. We do it again and again. And it started to evolve, and it evolved. And later in this iteration that we're going to do now, Jasmine, whom I've worked with since 2010, joined, is a very crucial character that evolved out of the last section of this 6 play vehicle, but she's a very crucial antidote. So we could talk about that too. But that's essentially the process and how it came to be so big, so voluminous, because we're dealing with ancestries, histories, actors' histories, and desires, and of course the huge legacy of white supremacy, which is global.
And we'll have to talk about how you had to rewrite this thing 3 times. Like, it was a 6-hour play at Yale Union. It was going to be a 6-hour play, a different play in San Francisco that responded specifically to San Francisco's kind of weird set of issues. And then it became a 6-hour, not a 6-hour, but a 6-segment play for performance for lockdown. And the set of circumstances that created the films that you see on the website on thelab.org are very specifically their lockdown films, and they address the conditions in which you all were living in. But this process of kind of finding these characters, or channeling all these characters, I mean, watching a rehearsal, you watch each of you kind of switch between one voice to another voice to another persona to another persona. I mean, some of the character descriptions, I mean, these are even shorter than most of your plays, but Michael Bonnabel is Alfred, a man once married to John, also a pig boar, and the Elf King. Paul Outlaws, Paul as Os, a god and an eagle. So I want to ask the actors specifically what it's like to embody all of these different personas, and then ask Asher, how did you write them? But mainly I'm curious about how do you embody so many different voices and personas, especially when you're on stage, you're trying to remember a characterization.
Paul.
Paul's laughing.
I was laughing because the process doing the plays was completely different than the process doing the film. For me, with the play, it's not, I wouldn't say it's mathematical, but it's very precise when I'm looking at the script and there are these different characters or different aspects of self that are embodied by these characters. I'm very particular about what happens and when my body changes or when my voice changes. And in the films, I took a complete different approach. I took one fragment, which was the idea of me, Paul, the actor, and me playing a version of myself. And then the os character and the eagle, I didn't give them conscious thought because I let the text do that for me. I just knew the text said these things, so I was going to go with it. But I was basically just trying to be as present in the moment as possible, which was something that we talked a lot about with the plays as well as the films, was that, things can turn on a dime, but the most important thing was that I was reacting in the moment to Joe and to the environment and to the words. So I was less mathematical and less precise about the delineations, if that's an answer.
That works for me. In my case, when we were doing the plays in Portland, it was the ability to work off of people that made the characters come to life. My relationship with John, played by Philip, and my other relationships were, and especially with Paul, were they helped me create those different characters because I was reacting to them. The filming was a whole different set of rules. And, it's interesting when you said hidden folk, Asher, because, I was in Olan Jones' musical piece called Iceland, and I played a hidden folk. So the hidden folk has kind of been in my sort of life for a few years. So it became very natural. That kind of environment and that thinking. But the filming required me to be more internalized. And it was less about characters coming to life. It was more about trying to suppress them. And that became a different kind of focus. And when they come out, it's sort of like, I don't want them to come out, because if they come out, then I will completely turn. And Alfred wasn't quite ready to become the elf king yet, but he will hopefully in the future.
If I may, there's one aspect I think that's really interesting about the question, and because Asher writes from the point of view of sort of this broader context in our history, sometimes going back beyond our consciousness and our memories. It's like epigenetic, that in a lot of ways I didn't focus on the characters being different. It was the same information pushing through this current iteration, and it was almost like echoes or memories coming through. That was the way that I tend to work with it. And in film, I let me be a lot more present too, Joe. And that was, I think, a really interesting and sort of more honest approach to embodying the characters.
Yeah, it's interesting. It feels like we all had very different relationships. Like Zoot, we played around so much, and then we were doing a lighting rehearsal. We ended up doing the thing that I really wanted to do ultimately, was to have this psychological relationship to you, that, I could feel my face on your face close to mine, my oppressive presence in you, your sort of struggling back to articulate the need to go back into time pre-birth. and the oppression, you know, like was a little bit of a dance. I wonder if you could speak to that.
Well, you know, it's performing in a theatrical play, kind of like what Michael talked about. You bounce off with your fellow actors, you bounce off your you react with the environment, but also you also react with the audience as well. Like you can kind of feel their psychic presence. You can feel when like a crowd of people feel anxious. You can feed into that. You can react to that kind of thing. But with the film, the thing that was really interesting is that, I mean, we all were our own crew. So we're very well aware that we're documenting, that we're creating a record of sorts. And so because we, or at least me, I mean, I can't speak for everybody, but because I knew that everything would be recorded, I didn't have to worry so much about like the future as much or the past. Like I could just be specifically present. And then without having like an audience, I think, and I've noticed this in everyone else's films as well, it lent to this ability to be super intimate. And like I think that all the moments in which all the actors are super vulnerable, like that was all able to come out. And so then you start seeing this aspect of the characters that are more hidden from the characters, kind of like what Dina was talking about. How do you play all these different characters? I think in that intimate setting where it's safe to be vulnerable, where you don't have to worry about the past, where you don't have to worry about the future, we could just sit in the present. You can allow those other aspects of self to come out.
Hi, can you hear me? I was going to piggyback on what everybody said so far, but add the fact that for filming, it's not like any old day of filming on a set at all. It's a much more vulnerable type of filming. Well, first of all, for some of us, we didn't have a crew. We were our own crew, like we said. So the split in the brain, right? But at the same time, it's during a lockdown. And there were dates that are assigned to each of the films, which are so important because it contextualizes that filming process to history. For example, for Chet in the film of Balance, where I'm in, we started day one shooting on the first day of the insurrection, you know, which everyone has already swept under the rug in such a way. And so while that's going on, we're using the devices like our phones and our cameras, and they're blipping with the news of that at the same time as Asher and I are walking through a channeling process about violence. So do you see, it's like a micro surgery. Like back in the day, there were these shows where they have a camera in the theater of the surgery and they're looking at the heart beating. It's not vulnerable. It's not vulnerable like I'm crying and you're zooming in on my tear. It's vulnerable like you're not even supposed to be seeing these things. And they're unique moments that probably will never happen again because of the historical specificity of the time we were filming in, you know, the lockdown. And the character of Chet deals with, you know, annihilation, you know, not just violence, but annihilation. Because like Asher and I, we were kind of reading the same text, like Achin and Frantz Fanon, and just this whole how do you deal with the internalized other and how violence is some kind of tool to meet this other, you know. I can go on and on, but it's just this whole point of view where you're not yourself, and yet that's all you have is this version of yourself, this projected version of yourself. Nobody else in a lockdown situation as a metaphor, as well as a complete physical fact. You know, we were all isolated. We couldn't touch the other, you know, like philosophically even. But yeah, just to say that vulnerability is so specific and will never, I don't know if it can ever be captured like that ever again at time. So I applaud the timing, this miraculous timing of Asher's to get us together now, you know.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's so astute, and I also want to remark, like, Jacqueline and Philip, they both played individuals who, and to kind of piggyback on Jasmine, don't quite always know who they are, if that makes sense. Sometimes, I think with Philip's character, I think there are times that you go in and out of someone who has a legitimate story to tell and someone who is maybe, I wouldn't use the word possessed, but certainly like drawn into something that isn't quite human, because it's not. And then with Jacqueline's character, the dope elf has so many permutations, so many psyches, is an ultimate shapeshifter. And I think you'll see that in the film, where this person is multiple people, clearly, to my mind, at least. So I wonder if either of you wanted to talk about that, if that's something we wanted to talk about.
Well, I was going to say in the play, I remember that the first time that the play was already kind of in process, so I came in later, and because I was new, it was new, and it was mostly written, at least a good portion of it, and I do remember the first reading and being really nervous. I was meeting everybody and had this text. But what I found, I think for all of us, it's always different for me depending on the project and, everything. But when I started reading it on the page, the way that Asher writes is very specific, and he writes the way that, he sounds out things the way it sounds to him. So a lot of time it really is a map for your character, just based on that. And something about and then also like, and he's very, very specific with punctuation. So a lot of, in Dope Elf anyway, would just be no periods at all, just, just, and so so that also gives you kind of the rhythm. So he gives you the rhythm, and my experience was that the writing is kind of like a spell. And so I just opened my mouth and kind of relaxed and just followed it. And I felt it coming, I felt, it starts infusing like a spell, or like the frequency of the language or the energy of the text changes, the way you oscillate, changes your frequency, I guess. So that was so it was a real easy fit. And for me, that particular role, that particular day, it just felt right. And I think there is like a bit of an opening, and for me, like feels like that way my ego doesn't get too caught up of just serving the text and really allowing whatever is wanted to kind of channel through me to have access. And then for the Dope Elf play, I was just Dope Elf. However, the Dope Elf was often shifting depending on the person that the Dope Elf was, dealing with, in order to succeed in whatever way he needed to in that relationship. So shifting his, female or male energy, shifting a lot based on the different characters of all the actors I was working on, what their energy was. And the Dope Elf was kind of not really quite human, so kind of looking for the human clues, And so a lot of my process in the play anyway was trying to read with this character that has some limited tools, but kind of trying to read in the person that I'm interacting with and figure out what I need to become for them to really like me or be afraid of me or whatever it is I needed. So it was so, super fun for me. Whereas the movie was very different. I think the movie was just a little bit, it was a different, I'm sure we'll talk about this later, so I don't want to take up any time, but it was what I was exploring with Asher, for me, was very different in the film than what we were exploring in the play. So in the movie, I still could see the different energies of different personas or personalities that Asher had written. Even though they weren't always, sometimes they were designated as different characters and sometimes they weren't. So in the process, Asher and I would kind of check in and make sure that the character that I was feeling was right for a particular section, was in line with what Asher was thinking. And it's a safe group, so I feel like we have a lot of permission to really just play and to be really, really intuitive and free and not have to kind of work, in that kind of way. It's just very safe. So you can try different things, and if it doesn't work, you can get it out of the way pretty quickly and and grab something else.
Yeah.
I hope I answered.
Brilliant. Perfect.
It was so immensely sad for me because I felt the wreck of the original plan very, very strongly. And although there's always a lot of cell death in our process, characters arise and then characters are dropped, and here there was kind of a big die-off. It felt like the environment wasn't going to support much, and also really lacking the conversation that we're used to. That really pushed me against the wall. And so it was a lot of coming to grips with loss of power, of being caged, of having not made the grade. The thing that was very alive for me was my hostility to whoever was behind the camera. Not the real people who were behind the camera, but that other person arose. That became very real to me in my preparation and in the filming. It's what it is. It's the wounded predator, and no one knows better what awaits a wounded predator.
That seems so right on.
Dang, yeah, leave it to the theater. My God. I've been trying to think about how to get into this question of how you all moved from the structure of the play to the films, and that sort of grief and loss and the shifting of those expectations and the weird, the fact is it's kind of low stakes what we do. It's like, adult daycare for the most part. But the fact is it felt high stakes in many ways. It felt like we were dealing with a kind of refusal of fixed narratives. And that's why I was so drawn to your work, Asher. I was so completely drawn to how it refused this kind of the categorizations of gender, of institutional identity, of this idea of wokeness, of any kind of these kind of fixed categories in which were becoming so prevalent on also becoming like people were just the fury of certain people on the streets that we were seeing with what these categories were doing and what these systemizations and structures were doing to us was so real at the time that I was like, where is the dope elf? Like, we need the dope elf to be not I mean the theatrical structure of it itself. So this Asher's method of theater making is very, very different than your traditional play. I'm sure I mean, Asher is an intuitive. Most people know that, but this way of thinking about the in between, of thinking about being caught in these spaces where there's no categories, where there's no fixed characterizations, where you're constantly dealing with a script that is evolving and changing organically. And sometimes even is barely English, in many ways, like, thankfully. It is between the lines and between the spaces of the people, and even between the gallery floor and the wall. And it's just caught in this in between. And so I want to kind of use that structure to talk about the transition between the play, and even maybe we can talk about what it was like to do the play at Yale Union a little bit, but just that, you all were actually living in the Yale Union space, which is a huge expansive space, but it's still a gallery. It's not hospitable to humans. It's not at all. It's not meant for living, breathing organisms. So, I mean, thankfully there's a shower there and everything, but like finding all of the structures was, we threw you in not so nice an environment. So I'd really like to hear, I mean, that's not a straightforward question, but I'd like to use it as a framework to launch some thinking around that. Thanks.
Yeah, I think the actors really had a strong experience, of Yale Union, who were amazing, and it was a big space, and they did have a big dining room, and we ate, thanks to a lot of these actors here, really well, and yet it was very difficult due to weather, due to ourselves, due to doing this massive play, and all the technical difficulties as well. But I'm really curious what it was like for individuals to, like, after, I don't know, a year or so has transpired, to think about what that was like, being in rather difficult circumstances that did, to my mind, as hard as it was, because we were all working really, really, really hard. It's actually difficult to underscore how hard we did work. That did bring up so much, good, bad, and indifferent, that I think then informed the next iterations of the play, and for sure the San Francisco play that we never got to do. Thinking about the violence in the land, there we were at Portland, and as people know, that Oregon itself has a long history of white supremacy, and thinking about the very different kinds of violence that are historical in San Francisco and the Bay Area, and the effect on the body and the effect on the mind. And again, all the characters, just to be really clear, are neither good nor bad, human nor non-human. They constantly shift, to speak to what you're saying, Dina. I personally believe that we're all multiples, that there is no such thing as a singular human. That is inanity that comes from a particular philosophical, legacy. But I think now, as we are approaching a period of time when we really need to understand the expansion, the multiplicity in all of us, we're beginning to feel that in the non-human, quote unquote, inside us and outside of us, ourselves as portals, as places of intersection, as places of, we rub up against somebody else, our cells go into their cells, their cells are in our mouths, when we speak. It can kill us, delight us, turn us on, etc. But it definitely expands us. And so I think my understanding of who these characters were and what the play was in Yale Union in Portland really shifted by the time we went to the San Francisco play, really shifted for these films, and is really shifting for the next time that we're going to be there this year. So yeah, so that's my overview, but I'm curious about y'all who are in the piece, what it felt like.
if I may, mute on, off. You know, in Yale Union, it was such a communal experience. We were a family, and then like families, we, you know, got under each other's nerves. We loved each other. We supported each other. We fought. We laughed. We cried. We ate. But what was so unusual was having the audience so present around us, in us, on us. I remember in one instance, after a scene with Philip, with John, and the audience is supposed to follow, I think they were following Jacqueline as the dope elf down to the far end of the space. And one woman stood right in front of me and never moved. She watched me to see what I would do after the shift. And I stayed in character and continued to, which was such an interesting experience as an actor, because I thought, okay, I have to get ready for the next scene, and I have to move this prop, and I have to move the house, or whatever I was planning to do. And it was a real confrontational moment to really be present in the moment in a way I've never experienced as an actor before, because it was just her and me. And, you know, we walked through the audience. We walked amongst the people. They were this close to us. So I have never had that experience before. And I don't know that we ever will. Maybe at the lab, we'll see. But it was so intimate. And the filming was more intimate in a different way because it was more internal, as I said before. And the emotions were very real. Not that they weren't real in Yale Union, but in a different way, because it was confrontational, because it was dealing with myself in this environment, which I didn't have anyone to play off of. And that became a different kind of confrontation. So this whole process is really putting us into a different realm. And that's, I think, part and parcel of what the process for this piece is.
Yeah, I'm curious, Paul and Joe, because thinking of confrontation, you had external confrontation as well as internal, perhaps? Or how would you describe that in the film?
Paul?
Joe?
Well, to preface, Paul and I hope I can speak for you here, my friend, are immensely fond of one another. So there's a real safety there. And yeah, we cross lines here and there. And we're both really physical. We come from a physical, again, Paul, let me know if I misspeak, a very kind of, our training as actors is immensely physical and grounded physically first. I always think of my brain as a tool that you use, but it only solves so many problems. You try not to make more problems with it. This stuff, the nervous system, the grounded animal, will kind of lead the way if you let it. And so my thinking as regards our conflict was that I like rough play. I'm game. I ask people to hit me sometimes, and not for any sexual gratification, just so that I can feel like I'm alive. Although sexual gratification isn't excluded if anybody hearing this wants to give me a thump one day. Paul, I'm not gonna name names. Anyway, so that's, I've said my 2 cents, maybe my whole quarter. Paul?
Going back to Yale Union, I had a really weird experience with the performance in Yale Union, in that, you know, the play is about toxic whiteness, or the legacy of white supremacy. And so I'm around white people a lot because I'm a Black person in America, and I'm kind of used to it. decades of it. But doing the show in Portland and in that gallery space, I was more aware of being a Black man in a mostly white environment than I usually am. And it was very painful for me. And mostly, I mean, as a performer, I love doing the plays. But I have to say, there was, as a human being, it was a very unpleasant experience. I felt that I carried a lot of the play with me when we weren't performing. And that was very heavy and very, very hard. And I noticed that while I was in Portland, because Joe and I are close beyond this, that I kind of clung to Joe a lot emotionally in Portland, and I was very hopeful of working with him on the film project, because I had just done a solo show of my own that was all digital and isolated, and I really wanted to be in a room with another performer for the film project. And I was half vaccinated and multiple tested, so I felt safe. But it turned out that being alone with Joe brought up a lot of stuff that I think was kind of under the surface in Portland in my general experience, kind of came rushing out in the film experience. So that while I really loved working on the film and also the results of the work, I came up against a lot of walls with Joe, personally, as a white man and as a cis hetero white man, that was surprising to me. But surprising, not in a bad way, surprising in a very productive way, I think.
Yeah, and I'm curious, like, I think as we go into the next iteration, that we can continue to work with that material, because I think it's really important to work with everything that comes up in the process, because that's the, not ritual of theater, that's a really overused word, but maybe it's the process of theater. I think what theater does that therapy doesn't do is externalize these things and make them public. And I think that's really important, because I think all the material in the play, you know, and not necessarily being the only author of the material, but the primary one, is extremely painful. I mean, there's nothing that's not painful in this play. I'm not in any way trying to reduce anything that's said, because I think it is meant to be painful, unfortunately. And the little that I, you know, if I read it or I involve myself in the play or the film at any level, I can feel how awful it is. And I'm sorry, guys, because I feel like even just dropping in as the director, quote unquote, feels really interesting, really awful, really great, really generative. Yeah, so I second that.
Can I say something, Asher, to bounce off of what you said? Can you hear me? Yeah, I mean,
I can.
You said the word awful, but I mean, coming from the point of view of having, you know, co-channeled some of the material with you, I think it's a brilliant, I think maybe awful, not necessarily, but this discomfort is for me a testament of just the somatic body, the fact that I can feel when violence is present. That is so important to me right now in this time, because, you know, the greater white supremacist mindset is that we're not connected to a body, our own bodies or brown bodies, enough to even feel what's going on inside of them at the time that violence is happening, let alone acknowledge when blood is spilt. I mean, really looking at it. So we can call it awful, uncomfortable. For me, it's vital to acknowledge it. Maybe I'm coming from my half of my family being nurses. The first thing you do, you have to assess the wound. You can't skip that and bypass that into healing mode where it's comfortable. Like, I'm sorry, I don't roll like that. I really want to do a good job of this healing process, but there's a time and a place. There's a way to get there. So Asher, for the way that we've worked together, and there's that discomfort, that moment is just a real vulnerable moment of truth that gets to like truth, capital T, like it's real. What's happening is really real, and it's an experience felt in the body. And I think that's really irreplaceable. It's something I don't have in other, theatrical or artistic performance, in the world, because people are afraid to go there. People are afraid to acknowledge violence. And I'm not talking trauma porn. I'm just talking about just really having an honest moment and being present with it, especially in this country.
Yeah, I think, and I don't want to dominate this conversation, but I agree with you, and I think we are afraid of our own violence, and I think when I'm directing, I'm clearly on the edge of violence. Not that it's bad or good, I just feel it. And as an intuitive, and I know you are as well, Jasmine, I find that the self-concept, the very fragile self-concept of oneself as good, is extremely problematic culturally, because it makes it very difficult to see oneself in all one's permutations, good, bad, indifferent, etc. I mean, I don't really have the language for it, because that's not what I'm trying to say, that there is good, bad, and indifferent. There's a field, and we all occupy multiple fields, and so this notion that we're good, or that no matter what we do, no matter what crimes we commit, we're still fine, we're still good people. That's very much like the hidden people, the good folk. And it is an incredible difficulty that I think we all face, or at least I face, and people I contact face kind of daily. Not everybody has that problem, but I'm just pointing it out and kind of vamping in case people have something to say. I have muted.
Okay, I'll say one thing. I think that the denial of violence is a grand disease that we share as Americans, and if we don't acknowledge it, as Jasmine said, which is why I want to make contact. I want to be reminded of the vulnerability that exists within all of us constantly. If the denial of that is just, it's in my mind, in my thinking, is disingenuous as an animal on the planet. And so that aspect of our history together is really important to me.
Thank you.
It's about 6 p.m. now on the West Coast here. But I just want to say there's a couple of questions, but if anybody from the audience would like to ask some questions, we'll keep it going for another 10, 15 minutes. But I know Zoom is hard, so I don't want to keep people on for too long. It is hard. It's horrible. But somebody asked, did I correctly catch Asher say that something would be coming in person to the lab? Could we get a teaser of what that might be? And so we just, I think, over the last 2 days, confirmed that we'll be doing some short concatenated version in late September, maybe early October. But Asher, do you want
to? We just literally talked about it, how we would do this after all the filming. So I think what we're going to be doing is kind of playing in the wreckage of the Dope Elf. And so I think, what? And I think that if people are thinking about coming, they can expect something that's sort of like structured chaos, because the idea, and I think we talked about this, I think Paul brought it up, the idea of the epilogue, where each person would choose a fragment. Oh, there he is. Look, he's magically appeared in another space. A fragment of the text. And we would work psychologically inside the text, each actor with their own set of internal rules and a negotiated set of external rules. So that it'll be a little bit like the play that we had hoped to bring to San Francisco earlier, which really fed into the era of this, that I'm from in San Francisco. I was brought up in San Francisco, late 60s. Where there's a lot of violence, a lot of consciousness raising, a lot of internal violence, confusion, and need to try to find oneself in that pulling of oneself in multiple directions. So I think we'll be thinking about that within the content that we described. And it'll probably be probably an hour, but it'll be pretty unpredictable, I would think, each night.
I'm so excited. Another anonymous attendee asks, I'd love to hear each of the cast members describe the process of filming during COVID in just 1 or 2 words, if you would each be up for it.
Philip.
Well, I was the last film, so it was double vaxing deluxe. Ian Byers Gamble was in my space filming, and we were being lit and directed by remote, and it was pretty luxe. You know, I made lunch. Okay.
What about Joe and Paul up there? You have to unmute, so I'm going on Zoot.
Filming during pandemic, I think interesting. A lot of unexpectedness, but not bad.
Not bad. Michael.
Well, I was the first one, December 2020, and I was a nervous wreck. To answer in 2 words, nervous wreck.
Jasmine, what about you?
2 words, yeah. Insurrection cookie. Insurrection cookie, because it happened on the insurrection, and Asher was so cool. He got me delivered cookies to me, because I we got real busy, and meals kind of like we're like, let's have like a break, and during one break, whilst catching up with insurrection, I had this really awesome oatmeal cookie. I'll never forget that.
May I add, Asher had wine delivered to me.
Uh-oh. You're not supposed to say that to Jacqueline.
I got hoagies delivered to me. Cleansing, supported.
Awesome. Paul or Joe?
2 words to describe the filming process. Judy Garland.
Mr. Joe.
Sorry, everybody. I can't hear a thing if you're saying anything.
Well,
These have gone cuckoo.
okay. Well, cuckoo, that could be good. That's your word. Thank you. Yeah, and just a note, for anybody out there in the audience has done it, I'm sure a lot of people have tried to film in COVID. The beginning, you have to...
Yeah.
You have to... Sorry. Well, it's very loud there. You have to clean everything. Actors can't be touched. No one can come in the room with them. Clean after. They can't have anybody like adjust a light. You can't tilt. You can't pan. The actor has to do that. Just to describe it, there's a phone and a camera, and the phone and the camera talk to each other like that. So if you want to tilt, you go, can you move that to the left? Now bring us with you. No, left. No, right. You're right. Left. A little back. A little forward. That's for one gesture to go, oh. So normally what a camera can do is like, move with you. And that is not the case in COVID. It was really a feat that these people did this. I gotta tell you, because it's astounding how people would be like, off camera, sorry for all y'all, but it was like, I hate this, kill me. And then the camera would be on, to be or not to be, that is the question. It was like immediate on. and because these are professionals right here. So thank you, professionals, you wonderful beings, for doing this. Kind of amazing, amazing.
This kind of funnels into the next question very nicely. Jamie McMurray asks, being forced by the pandemic to frame work into virtual platforms has the potential to increase visibility to your work by massive numbers. Are you planning other works designed specifically for an online audience?
Oh, what a great question, Jamie. Such a great performer, just great artist. No, I would like to make a film, actually. I really would. And so if it could be online, that would be amazing. And it would be so amazing to be able to do that, like, for real, with, like, a real crew and a real camera person. I learned a lot from this. I don't know anything about making films, and these are COVID films. So, yeah, I would love to be able to do that.
Lob asks, how much processing do you all have to do about the violence that comes up between each other? Is there a point where the violence dissipates between each other? I'm thinking Purge.
Awesome. Another great artist. Does anybody want to talk about that?
Yeah. Some of it gets taken care of and some never does. Very like life.
Yeah, I would agree with that, you know. It's complicated. Sometimes we have, I don't know if I have the ability to do that as a leader, quote unquote. And I think sometimes, you know, it's like, as you say, Philip, it is like life. Sometimes we get to talk about it, sometimes we can't, sometimes it's too painful, sometimes it needs time to be processed, sometimes we don't even know what it is. I wonder if anybody else could speak to that, because I think it's a great question.
I can. I just have my own private, my own practice by myself, which a little bit got on film for Asher's Balance film. But to have my own personal practice to literally intentionally deal with that. And for me, that involves, you know, working with knives. So it's real to me. And it's also a traditional practice that I can trace back. So it's grounded in my heritage as well. But I keep it to myself. I mean, I know I'm sharing it here on some Zoom platform, but the fact of the matter, I go home to that so that I have something to hold on to. That's just, I'm just a kinetic kind of person. I need to hold something. And so like the knives, the real, you know, and it helps me.
Yeah, and that practice also actually helps me. I think working with you was one of the first times that I really thought about violence in a very maybe three-dimensional way versus like bad, violence is bad. Experiencing pain is bad. You have to get rid of it as soon as possible. I don't know that that's always the case. Yeah, I'm wondering if anybody else has anything to say about that, but yeah. Sometimes I think the pain is important to sit in without trying to wash away, get rid of, solve, fix, in general, in my own life anyway.
I have to leave this country for 2 months every year. That's one of the ways I deal with it. And the place that I go is not necessarily an antidote, because going to Europe is like going to the source. but it's not here, you know? And so this country and this work, not only the work with Gawdafful, but my own work, my own practice, has a lot to do with American violence. So just not being in America for long periods of time is very useful.
I embody it. I make things so I can look at it.
That's amazing.
This question from Riyad, yes, that kind of flows with that. Do any of you ever find that other histories of violence outside the US come into your working process? If so, I'm curious about in what form?
Yeah, for sure. I think Jasmine, do you want to talk to that? Or does anyone else want to talk to that?
Yeah, just when I come from a family, and when I say, you know, heritage, or when I say tradition, I'm not talking millennia, I'm talking my grandparents, you know. So we have practices that involve sacrifice. We don't use that word, but when you look at what's happening, it's a sacrifice. And I mean, for example, this is like I have this in my like while we're talking, I'm holding this because it comforts me. But it's like it's a safe thing to do for the tribe, so to speak. So I mean, it's only other people looking in would interpret that as violence. But for us, we're giving tribute. You know, we're not, we don't look at it as killing. You know, it's we're doing you a favor, and there's honor in that. I mean, I don't have the right words to describe. I don't even think honor is the right word, but just these traditions of touching and seeing the earth and being on it, and then when it comes to these animals that we're with, that you feel them, you make eye contact, close quarter combat with your enemy, there's no distance, you literally touch the viscera, you know. And again, it's not, we don't interpret it as this evil thing at all. It's been imposed upon us, you know, through, you know, the colonizer's eye. But yeah, yes, it's part of my practice. It's part of life.
Yeah, I wonder if anyone else could speak to that. That's a great question.
I have one aspect of it, I think, that is largely ignored by white people in America and Europeans generally, and that's the history of conquest that goes back to the Romans coming in and establishing this sort of order, you know, that it's so part of who we are that we don't even see it anymore. That a kingdom has actually been taken. It's not something that God granted. We just made that up so we could feel good about it. It's such a part of who we are, we don't even see it.
Those legacies, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, what did I just do? Here I am. Well, I come from a family and a tradition that studies history, and that it teaches it. And so none of this is fucking news to me. What the real thing is what is the new information? What is the stuff I didn't read about? But my entire life, I've been taught and have taught myself, because it's so clear what's in the world and what these immense cycles are, and the question of where we are tending.
Y'all are so smart. Does anybody else want to speak? Jacqueline?
I think I got a little confused by that question, but it was violence outside of America. Was that
Yeah, I think
the violence you deal with?
you don't have to answer. Outside of these traditions.
That's why there is a lot of violence in my own, or I deal with a lot of violence in my own. I'm a writer as well as a performer. I deal with a lot of violence, but it does tend to be more dealing with violence, femicide, and violence against women tends to be, which is pretty universal.
Yeah, I wanted to also address that, because then as we continue working on this project, the relationship between white supremacy, patriarchy, and femicide, I think, are something that we want to continue to think about, how interwoven those aspects of global violence are. But yeah, I think everybody answered. No? Does anybody want to say anything else?
Well, I just wanted to add that who would have, I mean, the violence and the white supremacy that was surrounding us in Oregon and even during the last 5 years, but who would have known, you know, Jasmine, you were filming on the day of the insurrection. I mean, what transpired after Portland was, including the pandemic, such an assault that it was almost, you know, it was catastrophic. It was hard to believe that we really, the play was like an extreme example, and then we became like common. It just really became like a reality. And, you know, my character is thinking about murder and killing and destroying. And it was a fantasy, but then, you know, in the filming of the movie, that was the fear, that the violence was present, and the denial was becoming less of a denial, and that became such an interesting, you know, through line of this project, which was terrifying, frankly, but really important.
Yeah, I think Julie's asking a question, or Jay Tolentino's asking a question. Because I wanted to ask for clarification, because I see it in the chat. I think that this is touched on so much within. Would you say that the distance is weaved so deeply into this intimate work? And I think that is such a great question, because I think the distance, not only in time, from the beginning, the inception of this, and from this sort of like this thing that is, as people, we just cannot deal with psychically, which is this utterly indescribable, no words, there's no words for the barbarity of what we term racism, which is a very glib term for something that can't really be spoken. It's so deep and so long, and so this piece is just our little tiny human blip on top of it to kind of connect with it finally, maybe, sort of, kind of, honestly, maybe not. Maybe we can't do it. You know, maybe it's okay that we can't do it. But I think there's just a tremendous, like, each time we do this play, which I think I could write for maybe the next 5 years, it becomes another thing and another thing and another thing. So the distance is really important to what it is, because it's not something that a person can talk about glibly or write one play about, or even have a kind of American theatrical structure around, which I personally dislike, which is the idea that A, a play can resolve something, B, that there's this Aristotelian, you know, arc, and C, as far as American theater is concerned, often, not everybody, so definitely not the people in this room, and probably nobody listening, but often there's this idea that it takes place around the American, or I should say the white American, or the conception of the white American family as a structure for reality, and that doesn't suffice. And so what I hope that this work does in part is try to, like many other playwrights, dramatists, all these people in this room, snip away at the walls of this, the confines of this very attenuated notion of what human life, quote unquote human life or non-human life is, by restructuring what we can conceive of as theater. And unfortunately, I think a lot of times, you know, people don't, well, I shouldn't say people don't get it. People do get it. I think we're really hungry for it. I think we're really hungry to be multiples and to not have to stay within this, you know, narrowly described fiction of what it is to be alive. And so I'm hoping that our work continues to snip at the edges of this, even if we completely fail, which we probably will. You know, that's what I hope the project is.
That's absolutely marvelous. And what a note to end on. But I do want to mention that Mad Clot on a Holy Bone, this beautiful book, is available through X Artist Books. And there's a discount code, a 20% discount code at the bottom of the Asher Hartman page. But this is a compendium of all of Asher's plays to date. I've read it like 3 times now, and I still, my mind is just blown about how any of you actors follow scripts like this. It's completely mind-boggling that you can hold all of this in your head or mind or body in any way, shape, or form. But it is a beautiful thing to read. It is an extraordinary thing to watch. And the interviews and writing and introductions in it are extraordinary too. So please come and see the plays in person at the lab. End of September, early October. We'll give you better dates soon. Watch the films online, read Asher's incredible essay. And thank you to the amazing members of the company of Gawdafful National Theater. You all are wonderkins. So much appreciated.
And thank you so very much. Yes. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thanks, Asher. Thanks, everyone.